several of you all, when Leslie shared, who all had signed up for this workshop. Of course, we in the Faulkner County affiliate, as well as Arkansas Community Foundation, have worked with several of your groups already, and so I'm hopeful that you all will chime in and ask questions at the end, and just think through all this together. What I would like to say is, I think we are dealing with a new normal. This is totally, none of us have ever been through this before. It's a very, very much a new normal situation. But I will say that relationships have always been the key and are still the key to any kind of gifts coming into your organization. So that has not changed. Maybe the way we communicate with our donors and our prospects are drastically different, but relationships are still the key. So just kind of underlying everything with that. As you guys know firsthand, this has been the perfect storm for nonprofits. Nonprofits across the board. My colleague here at the central office has just gone through kind of an exhaustive study with someone down at the Clinton School, and they research nonprofits across the state. And what we are seeing from everybody is increased demand and, of course, lowered donations. So it's time for us to start communicating our impact in the best way possible, so we can try to raise as much money as possible during these unprecedented times. I wanted to just share a few things that we are encouraging our affiliates all over the state to utilize, and I would encourage each of you to utilize as well. But right now, 3 different things I would say, that because you can't necessarily do galas or any type of in-person events, that sort of thing, that where you sometimes would raise money in pre-COVID times. These are some ways that I think could take the place of some of those in-person events, and possibly even be more for you as far as return on investment, make more money for you in the long term, because you don't have to pay the costs associated with special events and that sort of thing. So I would like to talk specifically about IRA qualified charitable distributions. That's where somebody 72 or older would decide to use a portion of their required minimum distribution, and they can gift that tax-free to an organization up to $100,000 at any time they want. So those QCDs, that has really become a wonderful annual giving tool, a wonderful annual giving strategy for a lot of nonprofits. And what I have found is, with our donors 72 plus, once they do it once, they come back and they do it again and again, year after year. And let me just take you through the scenario of that. So if I have a required minimum distribution that I have to take every year, and say it's $10,000, and I would like to give 1,000 of that to my favorite charity, let's say Our House or Food Bank, just to name a couple of good examples. If I want to give that to one of my favorite charities, I can give that tax-free to those charities. So $1,000 will go from my required minimum distribution by way of a qualified charitable distribution to that nonprofit. It will not be taxed at the 30+ percentile and then given to me. It will go directly to them, and they will receive 100% of it. And so this is a really great way to make certain that you're talking about these IRA QCDs to any of your donors that are 72 or above. And I've got some marketing materials I'm happy to share that you can just put your own name of your organization on and use them. The second thing is, for 2020, as a part of the CARES Act, anybody, so let me rephrase that. About 85 to 90% of people nowadays don't itemize. They just strictly take the standard donation. standard deduction, pardon me. So anybody these days for 2020 can take an above the line $300 charitable donation credit above their standard deduction. So for a married couple, the standard deduction is $24,600. So above that, you can give to your favorite organization $300 outright, and you can add that to your standard deduction and deduct $24,900. So that's by filing unit. A lot of donors don't know about this, so I would encourage you all to talk to donors about this. It's a great way for them to give you just an outright $300. And that is, again, that is by taxable unit. And so a husband and wife can give one $300 if they're filing jointly. If they're filing separately, they can each give $300. So that's something new for 2020, new only for 2020, that you might want to have people take advantage of. And the last thing is, for those folks that do itemize, so they're above that $24,600 standard deduction, they do itemize, there are no limits on gifts to nonprofits for 2020, in the year 2020. So what that means is, in the past, people who donate to your organization, they only can get 60% of their adjusted gross income as a charitable deduction. But for 2020, there are no limits, and they could gift you up to 100% of their adjusted gross income, which wouldn't we all love to have donors that would give 100% of their adjusted gross income? But that's just some things to put in the back of your head, just to think about and to talk about with donors, because these are available. And the second two, the above the line donation and the no AGI limits, that is just for calendar year 2020. So just good for you guys to know and to share with your donors. So during this, during COVID time, we do need to figure out creative solutions to be able to share our impact about mission. We all know people don't all of a sudden up to give to an organization if they don't feel like that organization is having impact within their community. So we need to make sure to be sharing our mission. So some things that I've talked to other nonprofits about is keep asking. One of my colleagues coined the term, "Don't let the mask stop the ask," and which is quite clever, but I think that's absolutely true. People, are available to talk by phone. They're available to contact them by Zoom or any kind of meetup or anything like that. Don't stop asking them for your mission. It is more important than ever, as we know, that you all will continue to provide services to our communities. So don't stop asking, continue to ask. Connect with a civic group. Now, all of the civic groups pretty much are doing Zoom calls or virtual meetups. And so this is a great time to just say, I would love to be on your calendar. Can I come in and, be a 20-minute, have a 20-minute conversation with your civic group about everything that we're doing for, say for the Humane Society or for the food bank or for our house. So engage with those civic groups and get the word out about what your organization is doing in the face of COVID, how you all have responded, and how you are still helping the community during this time. The other thing is get your board members engaged in helping you. They know better than anybody that you're not going to have your annual fundraiser that might be $100,000 or $20,000 that's not going to be in the bank for this year. Engage your board members and say, would you set up a couple of different socially distanced coffees with me, or a couple of meetings with me outside with some people so we can talk to them about our mission and what we're doing right now. Board members are ready to be engaged. They're ready to help. They need to be told ways that they can help the organizations that they love. So try and do that. I worked with an organization just recently who had a virtual house party. It was done incredibly well. It was Advocates for Children and Families. They termed it Policy by the Glass. Everybody registered to come on, so they gave a password for the Zoom call. Everybody had their own glass of wine. They talked about their mission. They talked about what policies they were trying to enact during this time, during the pandemic. It was wonderful and really incredible. A lot of the people were with their spouses at home, so they were both on screen, watching it, listening to it. Both of them asked questions. It was very well done. So think about ways outside the box you can educate people during this time too, and maybe even find new donors during this time. Again, a friend or a colleague, talk to them about having coffee with one of your leadership team within the organization. Maybe somebody, at our organization, Heather is our CEO, and many people would love to have direct conversations with Heather. And so I use her a lot of times just to say, hey, Heather and I would like to come and meet with you to talk to you about what's going on within the organization. They don't want to hear from me. They hear from me all the time, but they love hearing from Heather. So I use her as a way to get an appointment with people, and that helps actually opening up the conversation. I tell you right now, especially with just the tax incentives that I just talked to you about with the CARES Act and everything, CPAs, financial advisors, those are really wonderful sources for you, for people who actually need to get some tax deductions this year and have the ability to give to your organizations. So don't forget to be telling those professional advisors your story. They are the spoke of the wheel, and they can get the word out to all of their clients. CPAs, especially with these new tax incentives this year, but also attorneys, because what we have heard and what we know is that people are going back to redo their wills at this time. They're looking at their estate plans during this time that they've had more time at home. So this is an excellent opportunity for you to talk to those professional advisors about your mission of your organization and how maybe they can be helpful to you to make certain that clients know about you to gift to through their estate. So any other ideas? I know you all are far more creative than I could ever think of being, but there's so much good work out there that's happening. And even a lot of people are having a lot of good luck with virtual events. I think we saw the other night on the Emmys that you can do an event like the Emmys, where people are sitting at home and enjoying their own beverages and that sort of thing, having a good time in a small group, but watching something that is impactful or that tells a story or anything like that. I had another, today I saw a video from an organization in Des Moines, Iowa that was wonderful. And it was showing how they responded to COVID and what they did. And they put together a very quick video that they've sent out to all of their donors, just for those donors to watch when they're able. So that's another really good idea. So any of these are just suggestions for you all. I'm happy to answer questions at the end, but anything that you all would like to ask me, my email, I'm sure Leslie will give it to you after the fact. I'm readily available and happy to help any of you with your questions. And I just appreciate all the hard work that you guys are doing for Arkansas and on behalf of Arkansas throughout this time.
Thank you so much, Ashley, and thank you for all the work that the Arkansas Community Foundation does on behalf of all of our nonprofits throughout the state, and connecting those donors with the causes that they care about. So for those of you who missed my quick tech introduction at the very beginning, if you have a question, you can drop it in the Q&A at any point if you don't want to forget it. That's the beauty of these webinars, is that you can go ahead and put your questions in, and we will come back to them when we are all done with our panel. All right, so we are going to transition now to Ben Goodwin, So Ben Goodwin is the executive director of Our House in Little Rock, and he leads an award-winning and nationally recognized nonprofit that's focused on empowering homeless and near homeless families and individuals. He joined Our House in 2009 after previous experience at Southern Bancorp, a CDFI development bank, and the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences. He's a Rhodes Scholar with bachelor's degrees in politics, philosophy, and economics from Oxford University in the UK, and mathematics from Hendrix. So he is going to be discussing some strategies that nonprofits can use to effectively communicate their case for support, and how to adapt and evolve this messaging in light of the pandemic. And so let's see, Ben, I'm gonna, ask you to unmute yourself. And I think you should be able to turn on your own. There you go. Yay.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Okay, and can you see my slides there?
We can.
Wonderful. Okay, thanks for the introduction, Leslie, and thanks for the awesome, first session, Ashley. I was taking furious notes on some of that, so I appreciate your, commitment to educating the fundraisers of our state and helping them and being a support. It's really, really, really appreciated. So like Leslie said, I'm gonna be spending my time with you talking about kind of a little bit higher level sort of way of thinking about how to convey the case for support for your organization in 2020. And in so doing, I'm going to share just a couple of frameworks that I use that help me think through this. Spelling it out in a slide form, which I've never actually done before, kind of helped me clarify my own thinking on some of these things. So I'm trying out some of these ideas. I hope it's helpful. Thanks for bearing with me. So first off, let's see, how do I advance here? There we go, pandemic messaging. So, all right, so I can't see anyone's hands, but if I ask for a show of hands, how many of you can just hear the voice saying now more than ever on Infinity? Yeah, there's a raised hand, I can't see that. TV commercials you've seen. And so you know that every brand in our country, like for-profit retail brands that invest in, have huge marketing budgets, they know that the pandemic calls for a different way of communicating. And they've all responded, and they responded quickly, and they jumped on it to the point where it kind of got obnoxious at a certain point. And so I'm going to share a couple of examples here. So first is this Buick ad. And so I'm not really going to do it justice just with this screenshot, but if you watch the commercial, you hear the like solemn tone of the person talking about the theme, Buick GMC is here to help. And the way they're here to help is they're here to help you by selling you a car and offering financing and, certified maintenance technicians and basically all the things they normally do. But, pandemic edition with the solemn tones and the music. And if you watch the commercial, if you're like me, you'll get kind of sucked into it and you'll start to feel a little warm and fuzzy about Buick GMC. But then when you step back from it, it's like, wait, that was just a Buick GMC commercial. And so, and I'm probably being a little unfair to them, but they're a big company and they can take it. On the flip side of a spectrum here is an ad. This is a tweet from Ford, which I don't know if y'all can see it, if it's too small there, but basically this was April 13th, so just about a month into the pandemic, and they're talking about how they reconfigured their factories to create PPE, to manufacture PPE, and also to create air purifying respirator, maybe that is PPE, in partnership with 3M. And so, on the flip side, I think this is a good contrast because here you have Ford talking about specific things they're doing in response to the pandemic in a really impressive way, like on April 13th, I think we were all just thrilled to see anyone stepping in to say, hey, I'm going to make PPE, I'm going to make masks, gloves, etc. They're doing in partnership with 3M, which for all I know is, there may be a competitive relationship there. And they're also kind of showcasing their manufacturing prowess, so even though, it's not about cars, it probably, might leave you with a warm, fuzzy feeling about Ford as like an advanced manufacturing company that's adaptable, that's innovative, that works in partnership and that cares about you and puts their money where their mouth is. And again, this may not be fair to Ford. They may have also run some more typical commercials at that time. But I just offered those two as a perspective. And if you shift it to the nonprofit world, I haven't spent much time looking at what nonprofits are putting out there. But the little that I have seen, I've seen a similar spectrum. And so I want to kind of try to crack the nut two different ways, by explaining two different frameworks. The first is a spectrum of the mindset that you take and that you try to instill in your potential supporters when you communicate with them. And at one end of this spectrum, I would call the scarcity mindset. And the sort of one example of the scarcity mindset is the message, your donation keeps the doors open. Now, when I started at our house, my predecessor, Georgia, who I worked really closely with, we had a button that, we had inherited from previous Our House days that literally said, support Our House, keep the doors open. And, I'm not criticizing that. Sometimes you have to do that. And there were times in Our House's early days when, that was the real message, and it was important that the community heard that. And I'm grateful that they responded. But I think that there's a risk in, I think with nonprofits, there's, when the pandemic in particular, it shifted a lot of people's messaging to this end of the spectrum. And I think there's some risks associated with that. So one of them is, I just think it's hard to sustain over time. I think that's the key way to put it. It's hard to build a relationship based on that kind of appeal. If you don't want people to be scared of you when they see you coming, right? And if every time you're coming, you're saying, we need your help, literally, or this place is going to close its doors. Or even if you don't literally say that, but if you leave that impression of like, we are in some sense desperate for your support, then I think that's not a strong foundation to build a long-term relationship with donors. In the scarcity mindset has a broader meaning, and I think it's a helpful frame. I think there's a lot of systems that get caught up in the scarcity mindset. But in the nonprofit, and typically it's contrasted with the abundance mindset, but I don't think that's the right contrast for the nonprofit fundraising world. First, I want to share intermediate step, the transactional mindset is what I call it. Your donation makes an impact. I think that's a powerful frame. I think it's really can be effective in reaching donors. I think donors naturally want to hear that kind of language. They're kind of primed in our our sort of like consumer culture to see like, what will my $50 donation do? What exactly will my donation help you achieve? What's the impact of my donation? And, I think Heifer International has kind of set the bar really high for how effective this approach can be with their, catalog where they, for $50, you buy a goat, and here's the impact one goat can have on a family, or chickens or bees, or, the whole catalog. And it's really impressive. And they've, again, set a high bar. It's hard for the rest of us to do it as well as they've done it. I think it stays focused on mission and outcomes. Like Ashley was saying, that's really important. It's really easy to communicate. That's a huge advantage. But I do think there's some disadvantages to it too that I think are important to keep in mind. One is that I think it, in an indirect way, contributes to the scarcity mindset in that it kind of puts pressure on nonprofits to undervalue their services. You know, if you want that price to sound good, you want $50 accomplishes X, you want X to be really impressive, but in reality, sometimes it costs more than our community fully understands. And if you contribute to that by sort of underselling what you're doing, you're making it harder in the long run for yourself. And then I also don't think it necessarily supports a long-term relationship. I think it's better than the scarcity mindset approach, but it's also, again, transactional. Maybe I won't buy a goat this Christmas. Maybe I'll buy a different present for my daughter. And so I think even Heifer does not put all its eggs in this basket. They do a lot of other innovative fundraising, which we'll talk more about. But then the last thing I'll say is I don't think it necessarily supports larger gifts. So, what's the impact my donation's going to have? You may not, that may not drive as large a gift as what I'm about to describe. There's a concept called the Pareto principle that some good fundraisers have helped talk me through, where you really hone in on the fact that it's typically framed as like 80% of your funding comes from 20% of your donors, but in nonprofits, a lot of them is more like 90-10. And you have to be thinking about how to drive larger donations, because that's going to significantly contribute to your sustainability. And so what I would contrast the scarcity mindset with is the transformational mindset. I'm not sure that's the best term, but that's sort of how I think about it. And so instead of thinking of donations as donations, I try to encourage everyone to think of them as investments. I try to communicate, and the goal here is to communicate with your donors like a for-profit business would with its investors, not with its customers, but with its investors, people to whom you're communicating the value proposition of your entire organization, of your mission, your strategy, of your team, of your capacity for doing this. You're building an engine that is going to drive change. It takes investment to build that engine, but when it's built, it's making a lot of things happen. And so that's the framework that I think is the most powerful. I think it naturally aligns with larger donations. It naturally aligns with longer term relationships, because you're conveying a strategy. You're inviting investors to buy into that strategy and really to become part of the organization, part of the family, if you will, that's going to see this through. And so anyway, I would encourage you to look back at your fundraising messaging, both pre-pandemic and post, and see where you think it fits on this, and see if you could see ways you could nudge it, towards the transformational end of the spectrum. Again, I think there's good reason to think, to put out messaging that moves towards the scarcity mindset a little, because we have been, our funding has been threatened by the pandemic, but I think there's danger in going too far that direction. And you also need to think what your longer term strategy is for getting out of that moment. Okay, so here's the other framework. So it's again something that's kind of borrowed from the for-profit business world. And basically this is talking about one thing I think you should have, my advice is have a specific appeal for or specific story to tell about what your organization is doing in response to the pandemic, or more broadly to the big things that are happening in 2020. But for the sake of this, I'm really focusing on the pandemic. And so I think, in contrast to that Buick ad, I don't think the Buick ad is really enough for a nonprofit. I think you need to describe how you're proactively responding to this. Doesn't mean you need to change what you're doing in dramatic ways, but you may need to change what you're doing a little. You may need to actually look at the product. What are some changes that we are actually making to the way we do business that's going to respond to this moment? How are we changing our messaging? And we talked about that already quite a bit. And then, how's our audience changing? How's our messaging going to hit our current audience differently? And what are some new audiences we could appeal to at this time? I think Ashley's right. It is a good time to think about appealing to new donors. But the key concept here that I want you to be the key takeaway is what is your brand? And if I ask most people, like if you'd asked me before I read this book I'm about to share with you, what is your brand? What is your organization's brand? I would have said, well, it's here in the messaging part. It's here in the middle. But really what I learned from this book I'm about to share is it's more powerful to think of your brand. Oh, there's my dog. It's more powerful to think of your brand as existing in the minds and hearts of your audience, of the people who know about you. And you know, you can influence that, but you don't have perfect control over that. And so that's why things like the Buick ad, to me, just aren't going to stick, because there's nothing in people's understanding of Buick GMC, you know, I could be wrong about this, but that's my opinion, that is going to resonate with that. Like, oh, Buick GMC is here to help. And so I think that's going to be a really fighting an uphill battle. And so I think the key message here is, as you shift your messaging to the pandemic, think about, be very explicit in thinking about, what do I think people already understand about us? And how is this going to land on that? How's it going to align with that? We're going to talk more about that in a minute. Here's the book. It's by a local ad agency executive named Martin Thoma, and he and his wife have a firm called Thoma. You may have heard of them. And I think if you go to their website, you can sign up for a free copy of this book. It's short, very accessible. I really like it, and it's local. So and it, you know, it shares some real, like, you know, high level marketing strategies that I found really helpful. Okay, so back to this framework. You know, here's some ways to think through, you know, what is your organization doing in response to the pandemic? Looking at it in specific buckets, like how, you know, what are you changing? What are you staying the same? But it's staying the same for a really good reason, because it is very, you know, important, and it's more important now more than ever. You know, where are you using the now more than ever phrasing, and where are you using the here's something new that we're doing, or here's how we're adapting and responding. Here's how we've embraced, you know, for the retail world, curbside service. If you see a commercial for Domino's that says we're doing curbside service now, that's an example of change in their product. And then how are you communicating it? You know, like Ashley said, I agree that being direct about your needs this is a good time to do it. And again, if back to the first framework, if you've established that understanding with your donors, that sort of vibe where they're investors, they believe in what you're doing at a high level, and you know, they believe in the strategy and the approach, they're going to want to hear those struggles you're having. It's sort of like a report to your investors. You know, I think you can be direct about that, and I think people will respond. And then who's your audience? Again, I do think this moment creates opportunities to reach new people, and our house has had some success with that. Did I get okay, sorry. So here's just some quick, you know, questions you can ask to spark a conversation in your organization, or just your own brainstorming about your brand. You know, so it's like, what are 5 things you think people already thought about your organization, already think about your organization, or feel? You know, some of your brand feelings aren't, you know, there aren't conscious thoughts, but, you know, a Coke ad and a Pepsi ad, the same ad would hit you different ways based on what you already feel about Coke and Pepsi. And then things would you like for them to be in the top 5? What top 5 thoughts and feelings would you like for people to have? And how do they overlap? How do they align? How do they conflict? What's going to be the easiest thing to squeeze in there? What's going to be the hardest thing? What are some strategies to promote that? And then how does your pandemic response strategy, which you've thought through, which isn't just marketing, but it's also looking at what you're actually doing, how does that fit in with those? And so that's just an exercise that might be helpful to you. Here's a few pictures I just took off of the Our House Facebook page. Scrolled through our photo album over the last 6 months and picked a few that I thought, kind of represented the vibe of what we're putting out there. I think we've over time built a reputation as an organization that is very, focused on our mission. We're kind of no nonsense. We are not a big fancy organization. We are very, we work hard. We expect our clients to work hard. We're involved in our community. We believe strongly in the potential of the people we serve. We value, we respect them. And so some of these things in the pandemic, we found natural ways to reinforce messages that were already put out there alongside, some of the shifts that we were having. So we launched a jobs and resources hotline so we could connect with more people by phone, but we're still helping people find jobs, And then the picture of the people holding boxes there is actually a programmatic change. Like we had all these volunteers, we had a volunteer coordinator, and we weren't able to use them all because of our, COVID restrictions on campus. So we started partnering with lots of different organizations in the community, including, including the City of Little Rock, including the Clinton Presidential Center, including Mosaic Church, to do different things, a lot of which are focused on food distribution. So our staff, our service members, and our volunteers were involved in a lot of different things in the community, and still are. And then lastly, you see that we're still graduating kids from our preschool into kindergarten, and we having graduations even if we're wearing masks. And you see the picture of the kids learning how to take a forehead temperature. So we're invested in safety, we're invested in teaching kids, in helping to promote a 2-generation family empowerment approach to lifting people out of homelessness and poverty. We're about family, we're about fun, et cetera. So we found ways to reinforce those things in our messaging, and hopefully, we've been successful. And so the last thing here is just, these are the 4 things I think you need to align. I haven't talked much about fundraising strategies. I know there's one about event planning coming up that you should tune into that'll probably get into more of that. But one thing I would say is, like, some of your fundraising questions, like should we do X or Y, it can really help you answer them if I've thought through these other pieces of it. For instance, in May, we had one of our annual fundraisers, Dinner on the Grounds, and it's one of the first virtual fundraisers to come out. And we thought, the idea came up, typically the event has a meal. Should we deliver a meal to all our supporters' houses? That was the question. Sounds really fun, really hospitable, and other organizations have done that, and I think it could be great for them. But we decided not to do that because, hey, we're working really hard to respond to this pandemic. We are focused on that. We feel like we've built a relationship with our donors, investors, and supporters where they're going to understand if we opt to not try to, move heaven and earth to bring meals to everyone's homes, but instead we're going to spend that time and energy focused on the big task we have at hand. And, so we never communicated that explicitly, but implicitly, a no frills event that's focused more on fun and connection, fit in with the messaging that we had already built up and that we were utilizing during the pandemic. Okay, I've gone a little over time. I apologize, Leslie. There's my contact info if you want to follow up or you have questions after. This picture I think is cute. It's at one of our preschool classes watching their teacher be the first one to get a COVID swab. And she was showing them how you could be brave. And anyway, I was proud of her for really following through and being brave. And the kids had a great time with that. So thank you, Leslie. I'll pass the torch to Sarah now.
Thank you so much, Ben, and thank you for sharing just all the innovative things that you all are doing at our house. It's always great to hear about, like you said, that unique brand that you all have built, and how other nonprofits can draw some lessons from that. So thank you so much. All right, I'm going to stop your video and then ask Sarah to go ahead and jump on. And there you go. So Sarah Riffle is our final panelist this morning, and she is the Chief Development Officer at the Arkansas Food Bank. She joined the Arkansas Food Bank in September 2016, coming from Boys and Girls Club of Central Arkansas, where she served as the Director of Development for 3 years. Prior to that, Sarah spent 5 years in the for-profit technology sector at Axiom Corporation in sales and marketing. And she's a member of the Association of Fundraising Professionals, the Association of Professional Women, and the Arkansas Nonprofit Alliance. And she is a graduate of the Little Rock Chamber of Commerce Leadership Greater Little Rock program. So we're so excited to have you with us to just cap off our panel this morning, or this afternoon, Sarah. And then we will do some Q&A after Sarah's presentation.
Great. Can you see my screen?
I don't see it.
All right, let's see here.
All right, now we see it.
Perfect, great. Well, hello everyone. Thank you guys so much for having me this afternoon. Thank you to both Ben and Ashley for those fantastic presentations. I think one thing that's definitely been evident is all of the connections that all of us have shared over the last few months. Some in ways that we typically have shared for a long time, but some in different ways that we've never really had the opportunity to partner together. So I'm going to talk to you guys just a little bit about the food bank's specific response to COVID, because we as an organization, being in the realm of food insecurity, have been pushed very much so to the forefront in responding to this pandemic. As a result, that has not only changed our fundraising, but also shifted our model of doing business very drastically and almost overnight. So I'm going to talk to you guys just a little bit about that. Just a little bit about the food bank. I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard of our organization, but we are the largest hunger relief organization in the state of Arkansas. We actually cover in our service area 33 of the 75 counties in the state. That includes Central Arkansas all the way down to the bottom of the state, up through the Delta and as far north as about Batesville. So that bottom big right chunk of the state is kind of our area. But because we do include the Delta in our service area, which is definitely one of the most impoverished and under-resourced regions in the country, that definitely allows us to not only have the most metropolitan area, but also the most rural as well. So COVID has definitely brought a series of challenges for us, and I'm going to just kind of give you guys some of the immediate effects that the pandemic brought on for us. First and foremost, the minute that the governor ordered the closures of all the schools, within a matter of hours, we were getting calls from superintendents, from the different school districts asking, what do we do about kids that rely on school meals? Free and reduced lunch is huge for so many kids here across our state. But then also for us here at the food bank, we provide our backpacks to kids over the weekend that provide them with meals that provides about 60% of their nutrition over the weekend while they're home. So if kids aren't in school, how are they accessing those breakfasts, those lunches, and those weekend backpacks? So I remember that the night that the governor decided to shut down the schools statewide, I was on conference calls with Mike Poore, the superintendent of the Little Rock School District, the North Little Rock School District, saying, what are we going to do tomorrow, next week, immediately, essentially, to make sure that kids have access to the meals that they need. So that was definitely a huge hurdle that we faced right off the bat. And for us, that turned into packing emergency food boxes. We started production on those emergency food boxes within the first week and started distributing those out to our school partners across our service area, so that when families came to do the grab and go lunches for their kids, they were also able to take home a pre-packed box of food that could not only help feed children that were in need, but other members of their family as well. Another huge hurdle we immediately faced, which Ben touched on this briefly as well, is our volunteer program. We at the Arkansas Food Bank rely heavily on our volunteer workforce. Last year alone, our volunteers provided over 33,000 hours of service to our organization, and we had over 13,000 volunteers that came through our doors to get their hands on with helping in how we fulfill our mission out in the community. So pretty drastically, we had to greatly reduce our volunteer staff. But then about mid-April, we actually did have a positive case here in our warehouse with one of our volunteers that required us to completely shut down our volunteer program for about 3 months. We started our volunteers back up here in about mid-June, but we are still operating at a very limited capacity in what we actually are able to accommodate to keep people safe and socially distanced within the building. We also had to make really immediate changes to our distribution model. The way that the food bank operates and distributes food out in the community is actually through the hands of our 420 partners in the community. About 100 of those are schools, which I touched on a little bit already, but the other 320 of those are our member food pantries that are spread across our service area. Many of those pantries are run by senior citizen volunteers, and they immediately were not comfortable being in touch with the public, keeping the doors open to their pantries. So, you know, at one point we had about a third of our pantries that were actually closed down. In some of those very rural communities, we might only have one pantry that is providing food assistance for an entire community of people. And when that one pantry shuts down, it can definitely create a big issue for us as an organization to find a way to then pump those resources into the community. So we have ramped up our mobile distributions, which is essentially when we take a truck of food directly from the food bank here and find a partner that we can utilize their parking lot and set up distribution lines and have cars line up. And essentially we've started doing direct distributions to the trunks of cars to limit contact between our volunteers or our staff and our clients, so that we're able to put those pre-packed food boxes directly into the trunks of cars and distribute directly to those that are in need in those communities. A lot of our pantries have come back online now, which is fantastic. But if there are, you know, upticks in cases in certain counties or certain parts of the state, we do see that we'll have some pantries that will shut down for a little while, or if they have a positive case with a client or with a volunteer or a staff, then we have to figure out during that time frame that they're going to be shut down, how can we get food out into their community? So I know we're focused a little bit more on fundraising, but I think that's really critical for me to tell you guys about the different effects that COVID had on us, because that has essentially been our messaging for the last 6 months. Is here are the very unique challenges that we as an organization are facing, and making sure that we're finding the best way to communicate that with our volunteers, our donors, and our supporters out in the community. So different strategies that COVID has kind of brought to light for our organization. And I definitely think these are some things that Ben and Ashley have kind of hit on as well, but getting creative. You know, for some reason during this time, we have definitely been a little bit more adventurous to try things that maybe prior to COVID, we would have taken a few more months to take our time to think about something, but because of how quickly COVID has created an urgency for us as an organization to have to be able to respond. We've piloted some new ideas, and definitely part of that is with our special events. I know that Ben mentioned that they had their event pretty early on and had to switch to virtual. Dinner on the Grounds is actually the same night as our large fundraiser every year, Empty Bowls, and we've shared that same event night for the last few years. So we knew that they were going virtual with their event, and we were going virtual the same night. And Ben is right that both of our organizations were kind of some of the first organizations to try this format out. And I thought it was really neat because we took two very different directions into what our virtual events looked like. For us, Empty Bowls, which, focuses on a few different elements, partnering with local restaurants, a great auction, we decided to break down the different elements of our event and find ways for people to still be able to engage with them. And the best way that we found to do that was to utilize a media partner. So our friends at THV11, who are great supporters of the food bank, actually very generously offered to give us an hour of their Vine segment from 9 to 10 in the morning, the day that Empty Bowls was scheduled to air. And so we broke down the different elements of our event. We took our silent auction, which we do have the capability already to do mobile bidding, and decided to open our auction up to the public. Typically before that, our auction had only been available to attendees at our event the night of. And we have found that opening that up to the public has been really successful for us. And it might be something that we continue to do post-COVID, even when our events can be brought back and in person. So that was something that we highlighted, was the different auction items that were available for people to bid on. We did interviews with our different restaurant partners that said, hey, you can't come enjoy this dish in person with us, but here's a cooking segment with Reduno showing you how to make that dish at home. And then also just focusing on what essentially the first 2 months of COVID relief had looked like for our organization, which those first 2 months were definitely probably some of the most difficult times for our organization, because it was so immediate and we were trying to work our way through a very different way of distributing food out to the community. And it did all happen so quickly that we were kind of having to learn as we go. So we really wanted to share kind of what that journey had looked like to the community at large. So we also put together some really great videos that just showed some of the mobile distributions that we had done. It showed the different ways that we had changed our distribution models. And it showed some of the clients that had received food, so many of which had never needed food assistance before. So that was a really great opportunity for us to take our event in the virtual format, and we thought that that was a great success. Another great success of virtual events is that you don't incur the costs associated with in-person events. So because we were able to save on so many of the costs that we would have had we had it in person, we were very pleased with how much we were able to net from the event. So aside from getting creative, investing in technology, and I know Ben also touched on their job line that they created. We also invested in a text service for our clients to be able to find a food pantry near them. I think prior to COVID, this would have been something that maybe we said, all right, let's put this in the budget for next year. We'll do some research, look at vendors, take the next 6 months to see what might make sense for us. From the time that we discovered this text service that another food bank had used to implementation for us was about 10 weeks. And it was fantastic. And we are continuing to use this service now. And we have had thousands of people text this service to be able to find a food pantry located close to them, receive the hours of when those pantries are available, and then also be able to see if there's a pantry, if they're going somewhere else, or if they have a friend or a family member that might be in a different city, they're able to help them as well. We're also able to put that up on signage at all of our mobile distributions. So if people need further assistance outside of the food that they're receiving right at that moment, then we're providing them with a resource without having to write anything or speak to them, that they can take a picture of right there with their phone and utilize later if they need additional assistance. We also went ahead and signed up for a wealth screening service for new donors that were coming in as a result of the pandemic. And one thing that I'm going to touch on next is data. We, at the very beginning of this, decided that we wanted to make sure that we were keeping really good records of how our fundraising was or was not working to how we responded to the pandemic. So making sure that we were keeping good notes in our donor database, that we were creating a flag for new donors that were coming in based solely off of COVID, so that we could go back later on, whether it be 6 months, a year down the line, and track those donors that came in as a result of essentially pandemic relief and see how they performed. Have we been able to retain those donors? Have they, increased the size of their gifts? What are they responding to past messaging that's directly related to pandemic relief. So I think that that's definitely a big part of it as well. And that wealth screening service is really helping us to take a deeper dive into some of these new donors to get to know them a little bit better and see which ones our major gift officers really should focus on during the holiday season that potentially might have the ability to give us a larger gift or a repeat gift this year. We also really ramped up our peer-to-peer fundraising because that is a safe and socially distant way that your supporters can show their support for you and ask that their friends and family and coworkers who are all home support you as well. So we've definitely encouraged our board members, our volunteers that can't be with us right now. Hey, if you're still looking for a way that you can help, create your own custom fundraising page, share it on your Facebook, send it out to in an email to your friends, text it out to your family, and then you're able to track, you know, how many donations you're actually bringing in. But then also it's a custom link that you can share with your friends and your family to show, hey, I really support this organization. It's important to me, and I would appreciate your support as well. So touching a little bit just on data, like I mentioned, really tracking those new donors, looking at the areas of our fundraising that performed well. Definitely our online fundraising has performed much better, obviously, than our event fundraising. So being able to see which areas of our fundraising definitely have performed better and pulling insight from that, and which new tactics that we're trying out are working and which ones didn't. And I definitely think that one thing that's across the board between Ashley and Ben and myself is just communication. That has been unbelievably critical for us. And, you know, I would say we have communicated more with our donors over the last 6 months than we have done a good job of doing in a long time. And these are definitely tactics that we feel like are important for us to hold on to post-pandemic. So we started doing monthly updates to our major donors via email, and then also doing a monthly partner update that went out in the mail. We had pre-planned in January those updates for the year and had monthly topics that we tend to hit on at certain times of year. And then when March hit, all of that went out the window and we picked on a month-by-month basis what was relevant content, relevant messaging that they really wanted to hear about and what might be different than what they're hearing on the media or on our social media and Facebook pages and things like that. We started sending personal emails to our portfolio donors, especially ones that had stepped up to support our COVID relief efforts. We wanted them to hear directly from us. That was a more casual, laid back conversation and give them the ability to start that dialogue to ask questions as well. And we found that they actually have been very receptive to that, more so than probably outside of the pandemic. They want to know what's going on. They want to know how they can help us, and they want to know what challenges we're facing. Like Ashley mentioned, utilizing your board. My fund development committee, after a couple of months, was like, hey, Empty Bowls, you know, is not going to happen in person. What can we do for you from home? And, you know, I talked to some of the rest of my team and we said, can we have them help out with some of our thank you letters? And so our fund development committee has written over 300 handwritten thank you cards for us, you know, over the last 6-month period. And they have really enjoyed that. They've really enjoyed getting to see familiar faces on some of these lists of people that they might already know, getting to talk about why the food bank is important to them and why they support our mission. And so that's been something I think that we'll definitely try to keep around as well, but a great way to engage your board and something that your donors really appreciate. Like Ashley mentioned, they get tired of hearing from us as the development staff at the organization, but hearing from board members who are truly volunteers for your organization definitely means a lot that they took the time to write a donor a special handwritten note. We also created a welcome kit just for new donors that came in through COVID. Just kind of telling them about different ways that they can get involved with the organization, inviting them to become monthly donors to the organization as well. And that was just kind of a great way for us to send them information about the organization, but also really working to retain these donors. Typically, disaster response donors do not hold a high retention rate in comparison to new donors outside of those types of situations. So for us, trying to come up with different strategies that would help retain those donors down the line, and that would help increase and build their engagement with our organization. We wanted to go ahead and start that right off the bat once they came in with that first gift. And then also looking at our direct mail and our appeals that are going out. You know, depending on the size of your direct mail program, for us, we plan a lot of our pieces pretty far in advance. And we really had to make sure that the messaging that perhaps we selected 4 months ago was still going to be relevant when they hit mailboxes right now. So, for example, you know, we had started planning our back to school messaging in May when we had all intentions that school was going to go back exactly the way that it normally does in the fall. And as we all know, that was definitely not the case. So we did a really quick refresh on all of our back to school appeals and languages that was going out through our direct mail campaigns that acknowledged, hey, school is going to look different this year. Whether it's virtual, whether it's in person, we're going to make sure that hungry kids are fed. So making sure that it's relevant to the trials and tribulations that your organization personally is facing right now, so that donors know that this is intentional and that the message that they're receiving from you is something that's thoughtful, and that also really speaks to exactly what your organization is facing right now. So I know we're doing questions at the end, but I am the end. So I'm going to turn it back over to Leslie, but thank you guys so much. Just to kind of reiterate what everyone has said, I appreciate all the work that all of our nonprofits are doing out in the community. This 6 months has been unbelievably challenging for all of us, and hoping for a better and brighter 2021. Leslie, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And it is always really exciting to hear about what the Arkansas Food Bank is doing. And I was excited to learn about a lot of those tools and different tactics that you're using for the first time. So we have some time here for questions at the end. I don't know, how much of it we'll need to use because I haven't seen a ton of questions, but at this point you all can raise your hands and I can unmute you and allow you to ask a question verbally, or you can put it in the chat or in the Q&A. And I want to start with one that was asked in the Q&A that folks weren't able to see. So I just want to give Ashley the chance to repeat your response to that for everybody. But Mia Bennett at Rise House asked for the tax reduction or deductions that are for 2020. Is that something that donors know about? And we would encourage them to use that opportunity, or is it something that we need to explain to them? And so Ashley shared a response to that, and I just want to let you elaborate on that a little bit for everybody, Ashley.
I just said back that I think it's always good to go ahead and assume that they don't know what's new in the tax laws. And because what we're finding is actually a lot of the CPAs right now, it's just buried so far down in that CARES Act that a lot of the CPAs don't even know about it. So I would go ahead and just try to explain it. And then maybe you'll hit some CPAs as well as you're explaining it to your donors, and then they'll know more about it and can share it with other people.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that the Arkansas Community Foundation is a really great resource for, like Ashley mentioned, that they have kind of resources and language that they can provide you with in order to share that information. So they're always a great resource for that communication if you're not feeling super comfortable with being able to explain information yourself. All right, what other questions do we have for our panelists? I'm like really paranoid that I just can't see your questions. So will somebody just like have mercy on me and raise your hand? Wait, oh, hold on. I saw a hand. I thought I saw a hand raised. Okay.
Leslie, somebody's asking, TJ Johnston's asking how often you direct mail.
Oh, great. Yes. Will you answer that, Ashley?
And I don't direct mail, so Sarah or Ben can answer that.
Yeah, so for us, it definitely is contingent on the time of year. The first quarter of the year for us, and we're on a calendar year, so January through March is pretty slow for us. But the busiest time for us, not only from a fundraising standpoint, but even just an operational standpoint, is the holiday season. So we typically pick up our direct mail solicitations pretty heavily around November and December, at least doing 1 to 2 a month, actually during those 2 months. But then throughout the rest of the year, there are some months that we don't do any, and then there are some that we'll do maybe just one solicitation, and then we do a quarterly newsletter every 3 months as well.
And for our house, we actually only do, we send out event invitations, but other than that, like a direct mail solicitation, typically we only did one a year at the holidays, but that was one of our adjustments to the pandemic. We sent one in the middle, like it was in July, for the first time ever, which we're now calling our summer mailer. And like, you know, Sarah said, we tried it without thinking about it too much, and it was successful, and so we may just keep doing it. We'll see, but yeah. So you know, we're much more novices in direct mail, but are, you know, adapting and embracing it more than we have in the past.
All right, great. And then we've got a question about virtual auctions. So what program or app did you use for virtual auction?
So we use Greater Giving. We've been with Greater Giving for about the last 3 years, and they are our entire event management software. The mobile giving component we added in 2018, and it's just phenomenal. If you're doing the events in person, it allows you to push out text messages to your event attendees throughout the event, and even now going virtual. We were able, once people signed up, to be able to bid. They had to put in their mobile phone number. So we were able, you know, throughout the week is how long we left the auction open for. We were able to push text messages to folks throughout the week. Hey, just remember, you've got 2 more days. Hey, today's the last day. Hey, auction closes in 20 minutes. And we were actually able to see that those text messages really helped in getting people to go in and remember to bid and look at things. And I think that's important when you go the virtual route for your auctions, because they are typically a much longer period of time, and people will get excited, bid about, you know, with something and then forget about it. So being able to kind of remind them that that's still open and that they might still have things that they're interested in was a cool feature for us.
All right. So I think I'm going to jump down our list of questions to one that I think is related. So do any of our panelists use text to give? And if so, how do you get the message out?
We do not.
Sarah or Ben, do either of you use text to give?
We have a text to give service. We were actually just notified about 2 weeks ago that our text to give company is being bought out, and that the new company will not be offering text to give services anymore. So we are actually right now evaluating other providers, but honestly, we're evaluating if we're going to even continue to utilize a text to give service. There are very specific venues or opportunities that those types of options are good. For example, you know, they do a big peanut butter drive for the Salt Bowl for us. And so being able to put a text to give number up on a screen at a football stadium to allow people to give right then and there is great. That's also great for TV. If, you know, when we did our virtual empty bowls, that was a great option. Here's a number you can text to make a donation right now. But to be honest, we really don't see a lot of donations that actually come through that channel. So I think we're going to be evaluating if this is something that we actually utilize going forward.
All right.
Leslie, I was gonna say, and Shelley might be able to text in here, but my colleague in Faulkner County, Shelley Mell, they've done some innovative things there in Faulkner County with some different forms of giving during Arkansas Gives and Giving Tuesday and things like that she might want to talk about.
Okay, I think that Shelley may have had to
Oh, okay.
Jumped off the call because I don't see her listed, but if she's on here, I will definitely allow her to talk.
Okay.
And so then we had a question from Laura King. Are you finding that donors want to give towards specific COVID related things, or have they begun to move forward? So I think that's a good question for everyone.
I think I'll start by just saying it's a great question to put into that framework of the, scarcity mindset to transactional to transformative. And, we would like to support your specific COVID related things is a very, in some ways it's a transactional type engagement with the donor, and which is, not to criticize it. I mean, it's good, and our house has had a lot of people step up in that way, and we've appreciated it. But I guess I think maybe I'm reading between the lines here that maybe you work for an organization that's seen that people are so focused on COVID, it's hard to get traction with anything else. And there's one or two ways to respond to that. In general, I'd respond by just saying, make sure you have a good story to tell about how you are responding to COVID. It doesn't mean like the food bank is right on the front lines of this. I mean, I've been really impressed with what I've seen the food bank do, what they're doing to support us, we also had it's some of the, Sarah, you described it as some of the hardest, times food banks ever gone through, because you all had to work so hard to do that. There's other organizations that have to get really creative on how they're responding to COVID, but I still think it's worth the effort to do that. I don't think we're past it yet. And as far as donors, wanting to specifically fund COVID related things, like that has been, honestly, it becomes a challenge sometimes. Like we have all of our cleaning supplies and masks and things, like we have funding to pay for all those things for a while now. That's not a need that we have, but there's still people who that's the one thing that they want to fund. And so the challenge is just to try to use that to start a conversation, to engage them and move them up that spectrum towards that transformational investment way of engaging. And with some donors, they're not going to be interested in that, and some are. But it's it's worth the effort to try each time. It could be a good way to okay, send some to Bethlehem House. Well, let's talk offline. I'm a big fan of Bethlehem House, so we can help with that if needed. But anyway, you get my gist. Like this, that's the kind of new donor you can engage now. And like Sarah was saying, whether they're giving specifically for COVID or just in general in response to the disaster, those are some of the hardest donors to retain. But it's still worth the effort, because it's still worth the effort to try to build a long-term relationship on that. It won't work every time, but that's what we're here to do, is to build that long-term community support.
Say that we are seeing kind of that flip. We were honored to be chosen by the governor to be the philanthropic organization that for all COVID donations to come through. So if people didn't have a specific charity that they wanted to donate directly to, they donated to us, and then we deployed grants throughout Arkansas. We did mini grants first. We did 744 mini grants out to 744 organizations, $1,000 mini grants. And then we did a complete RFP process where actual proposals came in from all over the state, and we deployed money out through that way. We ended up raising about 3.2 million through those efforts. And we saw, just very similarly to Sarah and Ben, we saw donors who we had never received donations from before, but because the governor had kind of selected us as the kind of the clearinghouse for that, that was an endorsement that we appreciated very much, and that was super helpful. And then we tried to get the money out the door as quickly as possible. What we're seeing now is actually kind of a second wave of people asking, what are you all needing? What are you seeing the needs are right now in Arkansas? And so we're actually pointing them to specific organizations that have raised needs with us, like maybe their initial proposal was for $50,000, but we could only fund them with $25,000. So we're trying to point them directly to organizations that still have great need for that giving.
And I think for us too, part of that was also shifting our messaging. I would say about 3 or 4 months in, we stopped talking about our COVID response and we started to talk about our COVID recovery. Because for what we had seen, people were starting to go back to work and businesses were starting to reopen, but that didn't mean that unemployment numbers weren't still unbelievably high, that there weren't still people that were in need of assistance. So it was changing from that urgency of we're in the thick of it right now, we need your help, to the needs are still there, but they're going to be here for a really long time. So much more touching on kind of what Ben said, much more of a sustainable message versus that urgent, we need help right now. And just kind of making that very intentional shift in our messaging to say, we do need your support now, and to continue to meet the needs, we're going to need that consistent support, for the foreseeable time being.
Right, and we've got another question in the Q&A from an organization about to celebrate its 1-year anniversary. So still has a lot of growing to do. We have some donors, but are always looking for more. So how would you recommend reaching out to local donors without coming across as only searching for money? This is a great question for all times, but also for these times.
And I would just suggest, I don't know if they have a board of directors or an advisory group or something, but I would suggest starting there in your inner circle and get them to introduce them to friends and colleagues, and again, work the circuit of the civic groups and that sort of thing, just getting your messaging out about what you are doing within the community and what kind of impact you are making.
Yeah, Ashley's the pro, and I mean, and that's great advice. And I do think you just have to have a team. It can't be one person, but a team of people who really believe in the cause, who aren't shy about asking for money because they believe in it. And I guess the last thing I would contribute to that is just if the value proposition, if you believe in it and it's solid, then it's your responsibility kind of to go out there and do it. Like it's not just your job, but it's sort of like, if you believe in this cause, if you believe it's going to make a positive impact, then you should go out and share. And you should have the mindset that you're really sharing a great opportunity with people. Like, they may pass on it, that it may not be a good fit for them, but you're not imposing on someone to share with them a really great idea or a really great initiative that's going to actually change people's lives. And so that's just some of the self-talk I give myself, to kind of hype up for going into an ask, but it really does help. Like, this is my job. I do believe in this. If you want to say no, you don't want to support it, that's fine. I respect that, but I don't feel like I'm, imposing on you by sharing this with you. So.
Yeah, and I think that all of our panelists today shared some great strategies for just maintaining communications with donors, right? And that, now more than ever, as Ben said, there are nonprofits are trying to just communicate to donors what's going on and what they're doing and how they've changed operation. And so all of those communication opportunities are a way to build that potential base of donors, right, without necessarily making an ask every time. So, all right.
Leslie, I'd add just one other thing, and Ben and Sarah can do this better than anybody, but actually having the clients, the people who actually receive your services, speak on behalf of the organization is probably the most meaningful thing that you can do, because it shows impact, but it shows specific individual impact, and that pulls people to act more than anything else.
All right, so we've got another question from Maya about donations. And so she says, most of our calls for donation drop-offs are closed, which we have a lot of. And so, you know, there may be other nonprofits on the call as well who, you know, you get a lot of donations for something that people think you need, and maybe you don't need it as much right now. So how can we drift away from that to push the need for other donations? Should we stop accepting a certain type of donation for a period of time? Just try to communicate that need for other specific items? What are some strategies? Maybe Sarah and Ben, do either of you have experience in getting just a big influx of donations for things that people think you need that you may not need right now?
Yeah, so, you know, for us as a food bank, quite often people want to give us donations of actual food, you know, and of course we need that, and we rely on that specific way for people to support our organization. But during COVID, that's been challenging, because for a while we were completely closed down to anybody besides our staff coming into our building at all. So, you know, we had a donation box that was, you know, set up on our loading dock around the back of the building, but it was not easy for people to find. And really people weren't interested in getting out of their house and doing that. So we're starting to see it kind of pick up a little bit, but I think for us, the easiest way, and this is pre-COVID too, is to be able to make the case that as much as we appreciate your willingness to go to the grocery store and buy a couple of boxes of cereal for us, your financial contribution to our organization, due to the capacity in our buying power, can stretch so much further and provide so much more of those boxes of cereal than what your dollar can do at the grocery store. So for the Arkansas Food Bank, bringing it back, you know, to that direct impact, $1 can provide food for 5 meals. So, you know, for our summer cereal drive, we say $1 can buy a box of cereal. Well, if you go to the grocery store, most of the time, you're not going to be able to buy a box of cereal for $1. And the reason that we're able to do that is because of how our organization is structured and the resources that we have at our disposal, and the access to buy in bulk, which, you know, individual people don't necessarily have that ability. So I think it's making that case that just says, if this is how you want to support our organization, great, here's the types of items that we really do need, and continuing to be visible about that. Social media is great with that. I love that our house a lot of the times will post their most needed items about once a week, and they tend to shift and change, and people can bring them exactly what they need. But, you know, also just saying, hey, for at least for us, these financial contributions are the safest way that you can make a donation right now in the midst of COVID, but also they allow us to really, you know, take those donations and serve the organization for what we really truly need, and how far we can stretch that impact based with, you know, a financial contribution versus something in person.
Yeah, well said, Sarah. And you know, specifically about clothing, Mia or Maya, just let me say, I feel your pain. Like that specific challenge is one that we've grappled with at our house for many years. And but ultimately, it's a great example of the scarcity mindset and how it can have negative impacts. And you know, I think what Sarah described really eloquently was a way to kind of transition someone up the scale from the scarcity mindset to the transactional mindset, and then even a step into the transformational. Like, here's our strategy, here's what we're doing, here's how, you know, $1 can help so much more because of the, you know, the plans that we have in place and the engine that we've built. And so it's a question of education. But it's going to be different for different organizations. There's a group in Austin, Texas, a homeless program called Mobile Loaves and Fishes that is really impressive. And their director once described to me their philosophy that they do not take any used item of any kind. They will not take a used brand, you know, relatively brand new, but used flat screen $5,000 TV. that no, if it's used, we will not take it. And they have this whole philosophy behind it, whole strategy. It makes people mad sometimes, but they see it as like, this is our strategy, this is our philosophy. It's always a chance to educate. For our house, 25 years ago, we were in the position where, we were in the scarcity mindset where, someone brings us something, we're like very grateful, always grateful, but, we would go through it and use it, as needed. Now we're at the place where we have sort of a middle of the road strategy where we see people, the donations help, but not every donation of a garbage bag full of clothes actually helps us. It takes work to sort that, clean it, hang it on a rack and sell it for 99 cents each, or give it to people who need it to sort it out that way. So we know it takes work to do that, but the work that is, the workers that are doing that are our clients, and they're getting paid to do that. So it's a way for us to employ our clients in job training positions. And we see it as a way to engage the community. I mean, that's what a lot of people's hearts are driven to engage in that way. And so it becomes a question of education, retention. Can we engage them in different ways? It brings a lot of people into our door. And so right now, that's the strategy we've cultivated around it. But I do think it's possible to say we're not taking clothes, or we're only taking these items, but I think it's going to require some of that work on the strategy messaging level, where you really understand why you're doing it, what the strategy is there, and then how to communicate that to the community.
All right, thank you so much. Well, we are just out of time. And so I want to thank everybody who attended the webinar today. And I will send out the resources, the slides from our panelists and their contact information to you. And I'm going to send you an evaluation as well. So you'll have that. But thank you so much, Ashley and Ben and Sarah, for sharing your expertise and just giving us some food for thought and some inspiration today as we think about just how we can carry forward the work that all of our organizations do in our communities, and try out new things and be innovative during these times. So thank you all so much, and we really appreciate you being here with us this afternoon.
Thank you.
Everyone, thanks, Ashley.
Thank you.